What's going on, everybody? It's AG here. Today we're going to be taking a look at my Big Ten tier list power rankings going into next college football season. We've already done the rest of the P5, P4 conferences, so I've done the ACC, I've done the Big 12, I've done the SEC. Big Ten is all we got left, and depending on how this video does, I may do a G5 one as well. I'm also going to be doing a tier list power ranking later on next month, about college football playoff chances. So basically, I'll take every team and then look at if every team had a loss, who has the best chance of getting in if they were to lose. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the Big Ten tier list power rankings. Join me down in the comment section while we're moving along. So the four categories we have are favorites. Okay, so that's who I think are the two best teams in this conference. Contenders, okay, those are going to be teams I think have a legitimate chance at making the Big Ten championship. So you're telling me there's a chance. Okay, so what that is not necessarily contender status, but if they have a couple breaks, they win a game or two they're not supposed to win, they could easily sneak in to the Big Ten championship. And then better luck next year. You probably don't have any luck this year, so better luck next year. Pretty simple. All right, these are in alphabetical order. So we're going to be going along and moving those around as we go. Now we've got starting with Illinois here is going to be our first one. Illinois, not a lot of hope this year. All right, Brett Bielema kind of, I don't know, hasn't really done much at Illinois as of late. I think they're going to be our first one in. Better luck next year. I don't really think they're going to do too much this season, so better luck next year. All right, next up we've got Indiana. Indiana, I think, is improved this year, actually. I think they're going to be in the upper tier of Big Ten teams. Curt Cignetti, coming over from James Madison as their head coach, definitely has things trending upward. I've got them winning about 8 games right now, but I'm going to put them in better luck next year. I think a good season for them is a winning season, and not to expect too much just yet in year one, but give Curt Cignetti time at Indiana. I think he'll do a really good job there. All right, next we've got Iowa. All right, Iowa, Kirk Ferentz always wins a lot of ball games at Iowa, and their defense is going to be good. We know that. So the question is, how is their offense going to be? Well, depending on if Cade McNamara, which is supposed to be their quarterback, if he is healthy for the season, I think they're going to be really good. Cade McNamara, you may remember, started a lot of games at Michigan before he transferred out to Iowa. He was injured last year. There's some rumors that he might be a little injured this year, so he might not be ready at the start of the season. But if he is ready come Big Ten time, watch out for Iowa. I'm going to put them in contender status, not necessarily just because of Cade McNamara. Even if they don't have Cade McNamara, I still think they're a contender because of the schedule they have. With the way it plays out, really, if they beat Michigan, they're in pretty good standing as far as potentially almost making the Big Ten championship. There's another team we'll talk about later. I think the winner of them and Iowa is probably going to make the Big Ten championship, maybe, but we'll get to that a little later. All right, next we've got Maryland. All right, Mike Locksley, one of the more underrated head coaches in the country, really does a really good job at Maryland for the talent he has. All right, they've gone 8-5 the last 2 years, but I'm going to put them in better luck next year. They lose to his little brother, Talia, at quarterback. He's gone. So how are they going to do without him, without that talent at quarterback? I think they'll be okay, as usual with Locksley, but not quite contender status or anything. All right, next we've got Michigan. All right, Michigan, defending national champions. They lost a ton from last year, whether it's head coach Jim Harbaugh, whether it's the quarterback JJ McCarthy, whether it's Blake Corum, you name it. All right, so the question marks here for Michigan is going to be, how is Alex Orji at quarterback? Donovan Edwards is kind of going to be the bell cow for him at running back now. I think he's going to have a really good year. But how does Alex Orji do at quarterback? That is kind of what's going to separate them here. If he does really good, there's no reason they can't be back in the college football playoff. But if not, they might have some question marks. As of right now, I think they are a contender. I know they have a ton of question marks. Number one being, like I said, Alex Orji, but also not to mention Sherrone Moore. Sherrone Moore, yes, he did good last year, beat Penn State, beat Ohio State, but that was with Jim Harbaugh's roster. How does he do as kind of a full year as the head coach now that he's had the offseason to work with? But I think Michigan has a chance, but I would put Iowa above them right now in contender status. Excuse me. All right, so next we've got Michigan State. Michigan State made some changes this offseason. Okay, they bring in Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. Did a really good job at Oregon State, but I think this is going to be a long-term project. I'm not entirely sold on the hire just yet, even though he did pretty good at Oregon State. I'm going to put Michigan State in better luck next year because it's not happening this year. Let's be realistic here. All right, Minnesota. Minnesota, I've seen a lot of people put PJ Fleck kind of on the hot seat, but I think he's done a really good job at Minnesota. Uh, he has like the most wins there since 1904, I think, the last time I checked. So he's done a really good job in Minnesota for what should be expected in Minnesota. But with that being said, they're going in better luck next year as well. He's got things, I think, trending up for Minnesota, but the Big Ten is just going to get tougher this year as they add tough teams from this Pac-12, excuse me. So I don't think it's happening this year. Next up, we've got Nebraska. All right, I've seen a lot of people throw them out as sleepers. I'm going to put them in, so you're telling me there's a chance. All right, they were fairly competitive last year despite what their record showed. They were really competitive in the games they lost. Matt Rhule, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He has a proven track record of turning jobs around when he's gone there. All right, think back to what he did at Baylor. Kind of started out slow, but every year improved. Had them in the Big 12 championship before you know it. I'm not saying Nebraska is going to make the Big 10 championship this year, but I think they are improving. If, like I talked about at the beginning of the video, they have a couple games break their way, they could easily sneak into a double-digit win season. All right, next up, Northwestern. Northwestern, kind of a really underrated year last year. David Braun got the head coaching job under bad circumstances. All right, they were not in a good place, Northwestern, but led them to 8 wins last year. Really good job. But I'm going to throw them better luck next year. He did a really good job last year. Can he repeat it? We're going to see. They had a lot of roster turnover in the offseason, so we'll see how they look. But David Braun has done a really good job at Northwestern, excuse me. All right, next up, Oregon. All right, new kids on the block coming over from the Pac-12. How are they going to do? All right, a lot of people have Oregon in their top 3 preseason. I don't, personally. So, contender or favorite, that's really what we're focusing on here. All right, they're definitely in one of those. You got to give them credit for that. But I think they're going to be very talented. I think Dillon Gabriel coming over from Oklahoma is better than Bo Nix. So I think their offense is going to be even more explosive than it was. But how are they going to adjust to playing in a tougher conference week in and week out? And they do have a favorable schedule, with that being said. But I think they're going to be really talented, but I'm not going to quite put them in favorite status. I think they are a contender. I've got them in my preseason top 10. I think they are definitely a contender, but I don't think they're quite one of the favorites right now to win this conference. All right, next up, Ohio State. All right, Ryan Day. A lot of people have been calling for his job as well. All right, he couldn't beat Jim Harbaugh these past few years. Michigan, though, has been stacked. Obviously, they won the national championship last year, but Ohio State has kind of been right behind them. All right, think back to a few years ago in the college football playoff. If they make that field goal, they beat Georgia in the semis, they're going to the national championship. They have loaded up in the offseason in the transfer portal. This team is stacked. All right, not only do you have TreVeyon Henderson coming back at running back, you bring in Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss. You bring in Will Howard from Kansas State. You bring in a lot of different transfers. You got safety coming over from Alabama. They've loaded up in the transfer portal. I think they're the team to beat in this conference right now. They've been waiting on this run for Michigan to end with McCarthy, with Corum, with Harbaugh. That team's gone. Now is the time. Ohio State's got to win now, otherwise Ryan Day's job is going to be in jeopardy. All right, next up, Penn State. Penn State probably benefits the most from college football playoff expansion out of any team in the country. Go back to a couple years ago, they're probably the 5th best team in the country. They just couldn't beat Ohio State or Michigan, so they got left out of the playoff. Drew Aller is back. James Franklin, I think he's done a really good job at Penn State. I know a lot of people say he's really overrated. I think he's underrated, if anything. I think he's probably a top 15, top 10 coach in the country. James Franklin does a really good job there. And similar to Ohio State, I think they've been waiting on, Michigan, or not waiting on, they've had to wait on Michigan to go on this run because they've been so stacked these past few years. I think now is the time. Penn State, I'm putting them in favorite status as well. They are among, with Ohio State, in the top 2 teams in this conference going the next season for me. I think Penn State's going to be really good. It comes down to probably them or Oregon is probably the second best team. And you could even argue, either one of them for first. Depends on how high you are on Ohio State next year. I'm pretty high on Ohio State right now. But Penn State, I think, definitely is one of the favorites. All right, next up, Purdue. Purdue, we're throwing them right in better luck next year. All right. This is probably their coach's last year there. I know he hasn't had a long time, but things are headed downhill fast, and you got to be able to keep up in this conference. They're going to miss Jeff Brohm at Louisville for a long time as their head coach. All right, he did a really good job at Purdue, and it's probably not going to be the same for a while. Purdue, better luck next year. All right, next up, Rutgers. Rutgers, kind of a slept-on team, I think, and not a lot of people were talking about them. They bring back Kyle Monangai at running back. They've also added some serious pieces in the transfer portal, but Kyle Monangai, leading rusher in the Big Ten last year, looking at their schedule, they've got a really favorable schedule here. Believe it or not, I think Rutgers is straight up in contender status. I know a lot of people are probably going to call that crazy. They probably have them nowhere near that. But go look at their schedule for me. There's no reason they can't win double-digit games this year. And if they beat USC, which I think they definitely can, USC lost Caleb Williams, obviously. If they beat USC, that sets up a showdown. I think with Iowa, I think the winner of that game could potentially sneak into the Big Ten championship, depending on what else goes down. But go look at Rutgers' schedule for me. There's no reason they can't win 10 games this season. Next up, UCLA, all right? Another team coming over from the Pac-12. Lost Chip Kelly, their head coach, to Ohio State as the offense coordinator. I think there's going to be kind of some growing pains this year for UCLA. They lost a little bit in the transfer portal as well. We'll see how their head coach does, kind of give him some time. I don't think it's going to happen just yet this season, but give him some time to build some things. I think he'll be all right in the long run. UCLA should be able to pay enough with NIL. Next up, USC. All right, they lose Caleb Williams, number 1 draft pick, to the NFL. How is Miller Moss going to look at quarterback? Lincoln Riley, kind of another like James Franklin. I think he's pretty underrated as a head coach. Kind of gets hated on a lot, but he's made multiple college football playoffs. He's produced multiple first-round quarterbacks, multiple number 1 picks. I think USC's got a chance here. All right, they have a somewhat favorable schedule. I'm going to throw them in so you're telling me there's a chance. They've got a somewhat favorable schedule. All right, and they didn't quite live up to Caleb Williams' expectations these last few years, but not last season, but the year before that. If Williams doesn't get hurt, they probably make the college football playoff. And I'm not saying they're going to do that this year, but I think they could easily be a contender if all goes right in a couple games. All right, next up, Washington. Washington lost their head coach. All right, Kalen DeBoer obviously is gone to Alabama. They lose a ton from last year's team that made the college football playoff and the national championship. Michael Penix Jr. is gone. All right, somehow he's a top 10 pick. I don't know about that one. We'll talk about that another day. But Washington loses so much. I'm going to put them in so you're telling me there's a chance, but they're much closer than these other 2 teams to better luck next year. I'm just putting them here because of that magic they had last year. I didn't think they'd be in the playoff last year either, but they were. I don't think they're quite that team this season. Like I said, they lost so much, and they changed head coaches. Jeb Fish coming over from Arizona. But if they somehow catch the magic they had last year, you could somehow see it happen again, but I doubt it. All right, last but not least here, Wisconsin. All right, Luke Fickell didn't do as good last year at Wisconsin as would have hoped. They bring in Tyler Van Dyke from Miami at quarterback. I'm going to throw them in so you're telling me there's a chance. Luke Fickell, the lust off of him has kind of worn off pretty quick. I think back to a few years ago, people were talking about him as like the next big head coach because he took Cincinnati to the college football playoff. But I think he can get Wisconsin turned around. I don't think it's going to quite happen this year, but things are trending up. Tyler Van Dyke, I think, is a pretty good quarterback. Wisconsin has a manageable schedule, I would say. Because really, besides Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, I don't think there's anybody that just terrifies you on any schedule in the Big Ten. Even Michigan, I think, is obviously not as good as they were last year. So if you can avoid and only play one of those teams, and a lot of teams do, you have a manageable schedule, I think. Wisconsin, Tyler Van Dyke, like I said, had some ups and downs at Miami, but think back to a few years ago, guys were talking about him as a potential first-round quarterback. He's kind of been banged up these past couple of years, though. But I think Wisconsin, if all goes right, could have a chance. But those are my tier list power rankings. As far as breaking it down a little more, in the contenders, I think Oregon is the best team. Michigan has the most potential. But Iowa and Rutgers, like I said, have the best schedules, I think, to where one of them could somehow sneak into a favorite status. And then between Ohio State and Penn State, I probably lean Ohio State as the favorite right now. So you're telling me there's a chance. I would rank them as far as I'd say USC is at the top, then Wisconsin, Nebraska, and then Washington is closer to better luck next year. And then out of the teams in better luck next year that could somehow shock us and, win 8 games maybe, I'd say probably Indiana, Minnesota, and Northwestern, and possibly UCLA. But those are my power rankings. Let me know yours. Who would you move up? Who would you move down? Or just drop your power rankings. It can be 1 through 18. It can be in my categories, whatever you want. Also, let me know down in the comment section, would you be interested in me doing tier list power rankings for every G5 conference? Let me know. Comment down below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe.